say, I don't know. More particularly, he would say to me, I don't mind. You may remember that. That was his maneuver for not being objectionable. It was always very classy. But you knew you were in wishy-washy territory. I don't mind. That's the name of this piece.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Columbia. My name is Stephen Robinson, and I'm the minister here, and we are delighted as a congregation to be hosting this memorial service for one of our own, a dear friend to this congregation and a dear friend to you all, and I would be remiss to not say a dear friend to the universe as well. That kept us always inspired and attuned to the mysteries that are out there. We are gathered in this place to remember, to celebrate the life, to grieve, and to say goodbye to Ron Edge. We have a wonderful gathering of music today to celebrate his life. People will be sharing. We have food with opportunities to share stories, which I know Ron would be most interested in. We will hear the sound of an accordion today to remind us of the great instrument that he played, as well as some other music that he loved and from his home. So we are so delighted to be able to have this time together this afternoon. I'm going to invite Chris and the musicians to come up for our first hymn together.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this celebration. There's a brief story behind this hymn, which is that the music is based in the second half of Jupiter from Gustav Holst's The Planets. The first half of Jupiter from The Planets was the theme song that my dad used for his TV show. So in the late 60s, he did his first TV set of appearances, which was a show called Science Talks. It was like a half hour every week, and he would give little discussions about science. And he introduced the show with the first part of Jupiter, and he did it by showing a little spinning frisbee that looked like a spaceship, and he'd be playing Jupiter. That was the intro to each of his things. And then our daughter, who unfortunately cannot be here today, picked for her wedding the second half of Jupiter, which is this hymn, and didn't know the connection. So that's why my dad was thrilled when she picked that for the wedding, since he loved that Gustav Holst piece. Oh God, beyond all praising, we worship you today and sing the love amazing that songs cannot repay. For we can only wonder at every gift you send, at blessings without number and mercies without end. We lift our hearts before you and wait upon your word. We honor and adore you, our great and mighty Lord. Then hear, O gracious Savior, accept the love we bring, that we who know your favor may serve you as our King. And whether our tomorrows be filled with good or ill, we'll triumph through our sorrows and rise to bless you still, to marvel at your beauty and glory in your ways, and make a joyful duty a sacrifice of praise.
One of my fond memories, and I have so many, of Ron was after a sermon that I gave here very early on in my time as minister. And I quoted Carl Sagan a couple of times during the sermon and alluded to some of the teachings of Carl. And after the service in the social hall, while eating cookies, Ron came up to me and said, "You know, I had several conversations with Carl." And being a Unitarian Universalist, I'm always looking for new deities, and I found one that day in Ron Edge, so quite remarkable. So for our chalice lighting today, I just want to read a brief quote from Carl Sagan. This is one of those places that lines up with Ron and the Unitarian Universalist values. Carl Sagan simply wrote, "Somewhere, something incredible is always waiting to be known." We start our service at the Unitarian Universalist Church here every Sunday by lighting our chalice, which is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Today, it is my pleasure to invite Josephine, David, and Ashley Von Edge up to light our chalice. Spirit of light and life, come to us. If you will join me by standing if you're able, and our hymn together is Spirit of Life. Seated. Karen and Rod Brown will share a reading together.
This is in your hymnals, number 530, but Rod and I will just read it here, but if you'd like to follow along, it's number 530.
Out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity, here have we come. Stardust and sunlight mingling through time and through space.
Out of the stars have we come, up from time. Out of the stars have we come.
Time out of time, before time, in the vastness of space, Earth spun to orbit the sun, Earth with the thunder of mountain newborn, the boiling of seas.
Earth warmed by sun, lit by sunlight, this is our home. Out of the stars have we come.
Mystery hidden in mystery, back through all time. Mystery rising from rocks in the storm and the sea.
Out of the stars, rising from rocks and the sea, kindled by sunlight on earth, arose life.
Ponder this thing in your heart. Ponder with awe. Out of the sea to the land, out of the shallows came ferns.
Out of the sea to the land, up from darkness to light, rising to walk and to fly, out of the sea trembled life.
Ponder this thing in your heart. Life up from sea, eyes to behold, throats to sing, mates to love.
Life from the sea, warmed by sun, washed by rain, life from within, giving birth, rose to love.
This is the wonder of time. This is the marvel of space. Out of the stars swung the earth, life upon earth rose to love.
This is the marvel of life, rising to see and to know. Out of your heart, cry wonder, sing that we live.
If you would once again join me in a hymn together, For the Beauty of the Earth, standing if you are able. We are going to sing only the first, second, and fourth stanzas. invite Chris to come and share 2 readings.
This is from Ron's book, God, Yes or No. This highly organized universe has more than a random creation. So what does this mean? Clearly not a God sitting on a throne with a long white beard, but something created the orderliness we see all around. Since our knowledge of the physics of the universe is changing day by day, perhaps our views of God and miracles will also change. We can no longer have God throw thunderbolts, but a God who created the symmetry group SU3 for the Eightfold Way and the standard model for particle physics. That takes some thinking about. This suggests that if there is something we cannot explain, we attribute it to God, a God arising because of our lack of knowledge. The interesting thing is that as our knowledge of previously unexplained phenomenon improves, it merely leads to an even more sophisticated, inexplicable phenomenon. At the end of the 19th century, Lord Kelvin, a famous physicist, advised a student not to go into physics because everything that could be known was already known. Then along came quantum mechanics to reveal to us completely new, inexplicable phenomena. Now we find that about 75% of the universe is composed of dark energy, and we haven't the foggiest idea what it is. Plus, a good 20% of dark matter, which we also have not a vague idea of what it might be. Only 5% or so composed of ordinary matter, which we do understand. This leaves a lot to God. We do not have to look very far to reach a point where we do not understand what is going on. So, for the so-called theory of everything, so much for that, has merely led to even deeper unknowns. Our knowledge resembles a giant jigsaw puzzle. As we continue to work, the puzzle begins to fill out from the center, but we do not anticipate it will be completed with a nice edge, no pun intended. There seems to be no evidence that we are approaching completion of the puzzle, since inevitably it wanders to new and different and unexpected directions. This second is from Tea at the Cavendish, from that Ron wrote. Unitarianism is a very liberal religion. So, what can a Unitarian son do to rebel against his father? Well, my son Christopher converted to Catholicism. In fact, I was not opposed to this because it showed he took a stand and was interested. However, as with all converts, he wanted to become a priest, which did not appeal to me, not being a devout Catholic mother. We were returning from SUSI, the Unitarian Summer Institute, one year and stopped off in Charlottesville, where Christopher was a grad student at the University of Virginia. We all went ballroom dancing one night, Christopher bringing along a very attractive young lady. At dinner, Christopher said, "Oh, by the way, Dad, I've decided not to become a priest." This was his way of telling me he had become engaged to the young lady, Karen, now his wife. There are some advantages to having a Catholic son, one of which is that I now have 4 delightful grandchildren. Michael, on the other hand, appears to have developed a very similar religious persuasion to my own. He even worked for a while at the Unitarian Church in Boston. And I think we go to the next hymn.
Rod is going to lead us in Love Will Guide Us. 131. Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah.
Sorry. 131? All in the fullness of time.
I'm going to play through just so you can hear it once, and then we'll get into it.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with love. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. May be seated. How do you have a memorial service for someone as large as the universe? We are going to do our best to share the story of Ron Edge today. We have several speakers surrounding us that are going to share the story. Chris is going to give a eulogy and share the story of his dad, and so many others around the different facets of its life, of Ron's life. I just want to share a couple of things. My introduction to Ron formally happened years before I became the minister at the UUCC. I was attending with my family and my two young daughters, and we just happened to come on a Sunday that was a yearly event called the State of the Universe. And I had no idea what I was experiencing. We just showed up on a Sunday for the State of the Universe. One of my memories that day is my two daughters sitting down at the Story for All Ages, and Ron was sharing the Story for All Ages. And he said lots of things that day that I don't remember or probably didn't fully understand. But one of the things he did say to those children that were gathered around is, there is a little bit of stardust in each of you. And I could tell from the sparkle in his eye that he believed it. The universe was captured in his eyes, if you ever looked into Ron's eyes. My daughters, who don't remember a lot of things that I ever say at church, have never forgotten being told that they are stardust. The impact that Ron can have. Years later, at a State of the Universe, when I was the minister of the congregation, it was a time for Ron and his Catholic son to have a debate, and which was a delightful experience of watching Ron win the debate. Sorry, Chris. But during that Story for All Ages that day, Ron was sharing about the universe. My youngest was present then too. I believe that she was around 2, something like that. And I remember Ron said to the children that were gathered, he was talking about the universe, and he said, you know, eventually it's going to just fizzle out and we'll all go away. And he said it so matter of fact, and the kids just looked at each other and went, yeah, is that really going to happen? And so I don't know what the conversations for the rest of those families look like at home, but it definitely created some opportunities to talk. During the time of COVID, when we were confined to not meeting in person as a congregation, but meeting over Zoom, I was looking for opportunities to get Ron involved in a service since he was able to join us by Zoom. And I came across the anniversary of Einstein discovering that light was not only a particle, but also a wave. And I thought, well, that's something Ron could probably talk about, right? And so I reached out to Ron and said, let's have a talk about this to see if this could be a service that we could build around to celebrate Einstein as we, in this congregation, celebrate science, but also celebrate this thing of discovering it as a light, as well as a light as a particle, as well as a wave. And so I said that to him, and I could tell that he knew I had no idea what I was talking about. Because he gave me his, well, I thought, oh, here it comes the explanation of that. And it was beautiful. And we decided afterwards that the most efficient way to help him talk about that would be an interview style. And so I said, well, we'll do an interview style, and I'll send you a series of questions, and we'll record this. That way, if we need to have any trouble with the live experience, we'll at least have it recorded. And so we sat down on Zoom, Ron and I together, where he was, I believe Karen was helping facilitate that Zoom call. And I had given Ron a series of questions that we were going to bounce back and forth between. I asked one question, and then he talked for 15 minutes. And that was our sermon that day. And it was beautiful and remarkable to listen to him talk, and a cherished experience for not only me, but for our congregation to be able to connect to Ron in that way at that point. He is, for us, larger than life. He is, I know, for Karen, for Michael, for Chris, and all of the family, larger than life in many different ways for you, as a family member, as a granddad, as a father, as so many roles that he played. I am delighted that we have an opportunity to gather and talk about this man, this amazing man, and I look forward to hearing the many stories and many opportunities to reflect on his life, beginning by inviting Chris to come and share.
So there are really three words that come to my mind about Dad's life. He lived a life of science, teaching, and humor. And I think what motivated Dad was realizing that the joy of discovery and the joy of humor made a difference in other people's lives. And that's why it was really important to him to share that. Many of you know, 2.5 years ago, the family and Ron agreed to relocate him near us in Minnesota, where he could be near our house at a memory care unit as the signs of dementia began to get worse. And it was rough those first few months, as it often is for people that have to make that transition. Every day, Dad would get very upset because he was confused about where he was and why he was there. However, his logic and his reason were still intact for a long time, which was really great. So I would drop by on the way back from work every day, and I'd tell him the story again and again of how he and the rest of us had all decided to come to Minnesota, where he could be near us and the grandkids. And all I had to do was to ask him, Dad, do you remember what you had for breakfast today? And he always agreed he had no idea. And immediately he agreed that yes, his memory was gone. So once he had a logical explanation of why he was there, he was quite peaceful. Like most folks with dementia, after a while, the distress became much less, and the memory unit became his new home. So the first year and a half, Dad was very lucid still. His short-term memory was gone, but the long-term memory was as sharp as ever. So I'm glad we managed to get him near where I was living because I was probably the oldest person left on the planet, the only person who remembered everything with him from like the early 60s, including, for example, I remember when Dad came to my room as a little kid late at night and very gently told me that Mom had gone to the hospital to have the baby that we had all been waiting for, my brother Medj. So whenever I mentioned any of these stories, Dad could recount the whole situation perfectly. For example, there was the time that he was brewing beer in our basement in Columbia in the early 60s, and he'd bottled it with Coke bottles. I proceeded to tell all the little kids in the neighborhood that my dad was brewing his own Coca-Cola in the basement. And I proceeded to hand out bottles of Coca-Cola to all the kids. The Baptist neighbors were not amused. Karen Brown reminded me of the story that we've often heard of how Dad, Ron, protected me, his infant son, in Canberra, Australia, where I was born. The cottage had a wood stove. Mom and Dad were concerned that if there was a fire, the baby could be in danger. So Ron had a unique solution. He surrounded the crib with firecrackers. So in the event of a fire, they would hear them go off and save the baby. I'm very glad they never actually tested the efficacy of this safety system. There was the time that Dad took Mom and I boating, but unfortunately the spot he picked was loaded with garbage and dead fish. My mother complained bitterly about he had taken us boating where there was nothing but filth. My poor dad defended his choice quite ardently and said, but it's clean filth. This oxymoron became the established family joke. Clean filth. One of my earliest memories was me telling my dad about how bad I felt because I had done something wrong or bad. I was maybe 4 years old, and it might have been lying. And my dad said, "Well, have you said the Lord's Prayer?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know what that was." So he proceeded to teach it to me, and it stuck. He taught it to me just that one time, and I never forgot that. So then, years later in the memory care unit, among the many stories we talked about, I said, "Well, Dad, do you remember you teaching me the Lord's Prayer when I was just, a little kid?" And, he kind of did. Obviously, we hadn't talked about it really much. And I said, "Well, do you want to pray it together now?" And he said, "Oh, he did." Well, so we proceeded to pray it together. And I think he actually really needed to do that because he really belted it out, which kind of surprised me. But I think it was something that he really wanted to do. Dad had lots of interests and hobbies: bell ringing, sailing, later years playing the accordion. For those of you not familiar with bell ringing, in England, many churches have 8 bells, and they ring them in a very precise mathematical fashion. It takes 3.5 hours to ring what they call a peal, which is 5,000 ringings in precise sequence of the 8 bells. Dum, da, 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 da. So Dad did this all over England in different groups. These people were like teams. They loved interacting, and he just loved hanging out with those folks. He rang the bells for Queen Elizabeth when she was coronated. And he did it around here, but there's not that many churches that have bells. But he loved doing it, and they loved him because he had all this experience. My brother and I never learned bell ringing. At least I don't think he has. But for me, sailing became a hobby that did stick because sailing on Lake Murray with Dad was one of my best father-son memories. So I've kept that little tradition going. The other thing was driving up to Maggie Valley and to Asheville areas to hike, and in the wintertime to do some skiing, which is why when all the news came about the weather and the destruction, it meant a lot to me, because those were like some of the best memories going with Dad up in that area. One day, Dad took me skiing at the Zugspitze Glacier near Munich, Germany. We were in Munich for the year because he was doing, in 1972, a sabbatical during the Olympiad. So he took me to the top of the glacier, and we skied down, and it was great until halfway down, boom, we were hit by an incredibly intense, sudden, blinding blizzard. Dad made it to the bottom. I kind of tripped, and I was kind of disoriented because there was blinding snow. I didn't know what was going on. So fortunately, a guy came and helped me up, and I skied down. Well, meanwhile, my dad was flipping out at the bottom. He was freaking out. He thought he had lost his son. He was wondering how he would explain to our mom, my mom, that, you know, by the way, I lost our son up there on the ski slopes. Yeah, no, he's buried in snow, I guess. Ron loved science and teaching. He could have worked for a company, but instead he wanted to do teaching and research instead. So in the late 60s, he started a TV show on ETV called Science Talks. He had a very simple, clever, low-tech intro, which was a stick with a point at the end and a spinning Frisbee-like thing that looked like a spaceship. When he had that, he played the beginning of Jupiter. The one I remember best, what he demonstrated was how to explain what they call the Bernoulli effect, which is that if the fluid flows more, the pressure goes down. It's the basis for the curvature of wings on an airplane and what makes an airplane fly. It's the basis for a pitcher to make a curveball by spinning the ball. And the way he demonstrated it was to hit a ping pong ball and put spin on it. With a high-speed camera, he played it back in slow motion, and sure enough, you could see the ping pong ball doing the curved trajectory. So this is the kind of stuff he would do on his show to explain the principles of physics, which was great. Later, that same producer, Dave Smalley, asked him to introduce Monty Python in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s on ETV, educational TV, because he didn't think the culture of South Carolina would appreciate the weird British Monty Python humor. So they thought they would give it some dignity by having a guy sitting there with this Cambridge British accent. So Dad sat there with a big leather chair with an ancestor on the wall, spigots coming out of the wall that said rum and gin. And he would introduce it. In his first show, he said, "I am not Alistair Cook, and this is not Masterpiece Theatre." So then he'd explain all about the basis in Oxford and Cambridge for the people that wound up doing the Monty Python series. So I told my friends, "Oh, Dad's on TV. You got to see my dad. He's on ETV." And so they all watched. Well, unfortunately, that week that they watched, Dad happened to show up as a charwoman. That is one of the little old ladies in London who got covered with black soot as they would clean your charcoal fireplace. So he comes in a dress, looking like a charwoman, and going, "Oh, what's this? This is the old saga. Where's Dr. Edge? I don't see. Oh, what's this? Oh, this is Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre. Yes, existentialism. That's what it is. You know." Sat down. He started talking about charwoman, talking about existentialism, and all these weird things. And so when I asked my friends if they had watched the show, they said, "Yeah, but your dad was not it. They just had some lady with this funny accent on the show, you know." My dad was big into teaching, and so he was big into helping high school teachers be able to teach physics hands-on. So every month he wrote an article in the American Physics Teacher called String and Sticky Tape Experiments. And that later got put into a book, which turned out to be a bestseller from that journal. And it was used by the high school teachers around the country because they could do cheap experiments with their kids. I bumped into a teacher one time at a physics conference, said, he was a high school physics teacher, and he said, yeah, Dad's book had radically affected his ability to work with his kids, and other teachers had the same experience. He felt very strongly that the United States should participate in the International Physics Olympiad. So he got the money, he got the people together to first send the first American high school team to the International Olympiad, and then they just did it year after year after that. and did very well. The one thing I remember him doing with them specifically as an experiment was he had them do a project where they had to figure out how to construct a paper box with stiff paper that could hold an egg in the center and then go up onto the second floor and drop it from the balcony on the floor and have the egg not break by putting the appropriate pressure on the egg. Very clever stuff. Later, Dad became president of the American Physics Society, which, of course, was an honor he well deserved. Dad was the Forrest Gump of physics. So he loved to tell stories of the historic places and people he knew and that he later wrote about in his book. His favorite story being, of course, having tea with Crick and Watson, whose lab was next door, year after year, week after week, year after year, while they were explaining these complicated molecules. They were figuring out, which later turned out to be what we call DNA. When the movie Oppenheimer came out, and Dad was in the memory care unit, and I asked him, well, Dad, did you ever meet him personally? You mentioned some stories about him, but did you actually meet him? Oh, yes. Well, he really did. It turned out that in '62, when my mom and I were with my dad in California, and Dad was trying to get jobs at Stanford and Caltech that did not work out, the brother of Oppenheimer, Frank Oppenheimer, was trying to start up a massive kids museum near Fisherman's Wharf, which did end up flourishing and is famous today. It's called Exploratorium. And he was putting together the board of directors, and he asked Dad, because of his background, hey, would you like to be the chairman of the board of directors for this museum that does not exist yet, but we need to get the funding to support it? Well, Dad was like, well, of course, I'd be happy to do that. Well, and that night, they had a big gala event to precede the voting of who would be the chairman. And of course, the person that Frank Oppenheimer really wanted to be the chairman was his brother, the famous Robert Oppenheimer, because he figured that, he was famous, could help get money for the museum, but he had to make it look all right. And so, Dad said he was the, opposition for this job to give credibility to this vote for the chairman of this famous museum. So he got to sit the whole night next to Robert Oppenheimer and just talk about the experience, the history of what he'd been through. I said, Dad, what was he like? And he said, he was very intense, just like the movie. He was very intense, and he always wore the hat. He never once took it off. I have to say that all the years my brother and I were growing up and that the grandkids were growing up, Dad was really good at never shoving science down our throats, but rather he would get us excited about science and physics by showing us toys. Like he had a little metal whale you'd wind up, and it spouted air on the top where the head was, and you had a little styrofoam ball hovering above it. So these little toys of his each demonstrated ideas of physics, and he would explain that. He would take the kids and us to the lab that he had, where he had equipment that he used in his course that he developed called Physics in the Arts. It was taught for many years, and then they taped it, and then they had the videotape that kids could get credit for even after Dad retired. Big hit with non-science majors, including our own Karen Brown, had experienced that. I'll always remember when Dad visited Cambridge with the kids and all of us and pointed to the room where he had worked and the room where Crick and Watson had discovered DNA. And particularly my daughter was expressing the desire, I want a piece of that, Dad loved physics, but next to physics, he really, really loved being a grandpa. And he made that clear in his book. I hope you all get a chance to watch the movie that we have put together about his life. You'll see the joys he had hanging out with the grandkids and great shots of him and Gertrude. You'll also see a clip of him at the memory care unit singing this favorite song with the music therapist at the memory care unit. When I was a kid, Dad would strum on his $10 pawn shop guitar and sing Botany Bay, a song written about the convicts going to Australia on the boat. I never heard the song again. Because it was an obscure one written in the 1850s. But fortunately, both I and the music therapist could dig up the words on the internet. And actually, I need you to pass me the brochure, because I didn't bring the words with me. There we go. So this is the song, Botany Bay, that Dad used to sing a lot when I was a little kid. We've already done it. We're good, yeah.
Yep, I do.
It's all detail.
This will do. I just need to basically make sure I'm in the right place.
Oh, this one is not,
I'll take this one.
make sure you're in the right key. I forget if you capo up.
Yeah, that's what I was confused. I think it is. No capo. Thank you. I don't know what that was about. Okay.
Farewell to old England forever. Farewell to my rumcoes as well. Farewell to the well-known Old Bailey, where I used for to cut such a swell. Singing to rely, oh reliability. Singing to rely, oh rely, singing to rely, oh reliability. And we're bound for Botany Bay. There's the captain that is our commander. There's the bosun and all the ship's crew. There's the first class and second class passengers. Knows what we poor convicts go through. Singing to rely, oh reliability. Singing to rely, oh rely, singing to rely, oh reliability. And we're bound for Botany Bay. Tain't leaving old England we cares about. Tain't cause we misspells what we knows, but because we're all light-fingered gentry, hops around with a log on our toes. Singing to rely, oh reliability. Singing to rely, oh rely, singing to rely, oh reliability. When we're bound for Botany Bay. Now all my young dukies and duchesses, take warning from what I've to say. Mind all is your own as you touch us, or you'll find us in Botany Bay. Singing to rely, oh reliability. Singing to rely, oh rely, singing to rely, oh reliability. And we're bound for Botany Bay.
Thank you, Chris. Now we're going to hear from Michael, Nedge, and then Karen.
Hey, everyone. So when I was doing a little research about doing a eulogy, one of the common tropes is, they come like, Ronald D was a complicated man, with the idea being that you have to go into depth to learn about them. And I was thinking, well, that's not Dad at all. One of the things I loved about Dad is that he, in many ways, he was just so straightforward. Dad loved learning. Dad loved teaching. Dad loved science. Dad loved music. Dad loved art. And all these threads were in his life. It's not like, but he was forced into a life of politics. No, Dad got to live what he enjoyed. And that excitement always came out. Growing up, with Ron as my father, well, number one, I was gonna do well in school. There was no question, how important academia was. But as a little kid, I'd go into my dad's office, and he had all of these science toys. And, and Chris talked about the little whale and stuff. But one that got me, and there was this purple koala bear. And I'm like, a purple koala bear, this is kind of wild. Well, Dad was a bit of an absent-minded professor or, kind of a Disney mad scientist from the very beginning. So when he was in Australia for grad school, he was doing some work on, I believe, on gamma ray radiation, and he needed to have a large body of water to put a smaller container in. So he thought, oh, well, in Australia, they collect the rainwater and use it as drinking water. He thought, oh, well, there's a big tank on the roof. I'll use that. Not fully thinking that, well, that's their drinking water. So he put this experiment in, and unfortunately, someone had nudged it, and it spilled some magnesium permanganate into the water, and the water supply turned bright purple. So the dean was furious. He lines up all the grad students, because he was certain this was a prank, and he was like, tell me who did this. Whoever did this is getting expelled. And if you don't tell me who did it, I will expel all of you. And he's like furious. And finally, one of the grad students were like, it was Edge, sir. It was Ron Edge. And the dean goes, I should have known. Because he knew it wasn't done, as a mean prank. It was my dad being the not quite as careful as he should have been absent-minded professor, in his early 20s. So, I think when you're trying to describe my dad, like, oh, here's this man, and, he wears these loud clothes, and he'll play the accordion by the river, and newscasters come up to talk to him, and, and then, he takes people on top of radio towers during thunderstorms, and, he is the ultimate absent-minded professor. I'm thinking he could be in any Disney movie. In fact, I think we should write a new one centered on my dad, there's just always so much there that was pure about his love of learning and teaching. And because, Dad was never like, oh, I know more than you. He was like, I found this cool thing. Let me explain it. It was quite a wild time. So Dad was the person that you met. You came, and within 5 minutes, you really understood that he loved people, that he loved learning about the world, and that there really was always an adventure somewhere out there if you were just open to experiencing it. I remember one time some Unitarian kids came over to his house to go sailing, and the sailboat tipped over. And it was just, and sometimes with some people, they'd be like, oh, we got wet, it was terrible. And it was just a grand adventure. They came back soaking wet, and we had to figure out how to try to rescue the boat. But it was, it was a joyous occasion, not a negative one. And so whenever, things aren't quite going as planned, I always think, all right, what would Dad do? How can we make this fun? And what can I learn? I just want to give a little bit of color to some of the stories Chris told earlier. One was the second time Dad was on TV, he was dressed up as this cleaning lady. And I was going to a Catholic high school at the time. And that Monday at school, all the teachers were terrified because they had seen this. And they're like, wait, his father has worn a dress on TV. Clearly the worst possible fate has already befallen him. How can we try to reprimand a child whose father, and of course I'm telling everyone, hey, did you see my dad? And it was, yeah, I was really not meant for that school. And then when Dad was mentioning about Crick and Watson, what I always remember was when Crick and Watson first told my dad what they're doing, my dad goes, oh, well, that's very complex, and you might have trouble getting funding. If I were you, I would drop that and start doing solid state physics. The funding is easier. So we'd be living in a different world if Crick and Watson had listened to my dad. So yeah, Dad had met so many people, and he always had these little anecdotes. And it just reminded me that, I love learning, I love science. But as some of you may have noticed, I'm a very people-focused person. And I'm always thinking, anyone who has a different background from me, it's like, oh, what can I learn? And I realized, I got that from Dad. And last night I was describing my dad to someone, and this one was going, oh, he sounds a lot like you. And I'm like, and I was thinking, that feels like a compliment, so really so many stories. So it's not Botany Bay, I don't have any accompaniment, but Dad and I had one song that we always sang together. We started doing this at swim, and he'd play the accordion, I'd sing along. It was, so this is just my little song with Dad. How can a guinea pig show he's glad if he doesn't have a tail to wag? All other animals you will find have a little tail fastened on behind. If they only gave a tail to a guinea pig and finished off a decent job, the price of a guinea pig would go right up from a guinea to 30 bob. So we tried to alternate the lyrics and, but yeah, that's just, so whenever I have the chance, I teach that song to little kids. Like any kid I meet who has a guinea pig, I go, I have a song for you that my dad taught me. So I'm trying to keep that little part going forward. So Dad really was the person you met. And I think about that. Sometimes we make choices in life that take us away from who we are. And Dad, both by fortune and by thought, created a life that really was him. And, up until Dad was like 85, he was the most active guy you'd ever met. I remember when he retired and he became president of the American Association of Physics Teachers, and he was flying to Europe. And I'm like, Dad, you're the busiest retired guy I've ever seen. And he's just, working away happy. And, and he didn't like to be bored. So don't be bored.
Hi, I'm Karen Brown, and I am the stepdaughter of Ron. And he's been a part of my family life for like 40 years. And it's just been a great joy to be a part of this family and to be a part of Ron's life. I have some follow-ups for some of the things that y'all have said, but they escape me. Ron had this fantastic memory, except for the short-term memory when he had dementia. He could remember so many things in details, like limericks. But it had to be just precisely so, and he would remember it, he would recite. Shakespeare, we'd be driving to the doctor, just a few years ago, and something would strike him, and he'd recite poetry and all kinds of things. It was really cool. But my memory, no. But I do want to mention, when I took physics in the arts, this did not happen, but I have heard, and maybe you can tell me if it's true, that he used to shoot a cannon off. I mean, this man was Teflon, as you said about the bergamot in the water. I think it turns purple when you pee in it. Is that the story?
No, just it turned the water purple.
It just turns it purple. Okay, well, all right. But, yeah. And the other thing was that he would, I think I heard this from Ron, he would swing a ball like a cannonball from up high, and he'd worked out the physics of it so that where it would stop and swing back. And I don't know, somebody would stand where the ball is like coming at him, and it would, go back. And I'm wondering, did this happen, Chris?
I don't know that story.
You don't know that story?
I saw it.
Do you promise?
I promise. I fixed the ball for him a few times.
And are you in the you were in the physics department?
Yes, I was.
Oh my gosh, do you have stories to tell? I want to hear. But okay, so it happened, and it's practically unbelievable to me that, goodness. The main thing about Ron, my sister wants me to tell you because she's afraid she'll cry, and I may, but the main thing for her, which she just appreciated so much about Ron, is that he made my mother happy. And that is very true. And I think he made people all around him happy, which is such a gift. He and my mother enjoyed folk dancing together. They probably danced every week. They went to meetups. If you look up my mother's obituary, he wanted to put in that obituary all these meetups that they went to, all these organizations for folk dancing. They played music together. They loved children. Quite amazing to me how much he loved children. If there was a baby, he would spend a long, long time wiggling his foot and looking at his eyes. And I think that has a lot to do with that. The first month, well, probably it's just who he is. But the first month that as I understand it, and I may have a little mixed up facts, that your mother gave birth to you, Chris, that she stayed in the hospital for a month. And here he was, a young man, and he had to stay home and take care of you and make formula. And they only had, I guess, a wood stove. And for cooking, you know, diapers, cleaning the diapers, which he said really stink bad on formula. And so he's really bonded to children, and that's just such a neat thing. There's some stories in his book, Tea at Cavendish, which are just hilarious about what he did in those days. I would certainly recommend reading it. And Chris is one who helped turn it into a book available on Amazon, though Ron was giving away copies left and right all the time. But he and my mother, they went camping. They traveled to UU meetups like several times a year. Like for 40 years, they went in the summer to a meetup in Virginia. In the winter, the day after Christmas, they would be down at the south end of Florida, and they would spend a week doing interesting, creative, different things, exploring, you know, theater, learning to, what does it do when you fly on a kite in the sky, but you're in the sky? What is that called? Hang gliding. Hang gliding, all kinds of hiking. So, I mean, it wasn't all adventure like that, but you know, he would do a State of the Universe address there, that sort of thing. And he loved visiting with family. And I think the thing that stands out to me about Ron is he just really loved, he loved being delighted with life and bringing that to people. He would go busk on Saturdays at Soda City. He loved to do that. And it's just that kind of that community public life. A friend said he should, or not a friend, one of the people would want to give him money. So eventually he had to put out a hat. They told him he needed to put out a hat. So he did, but he didn't want the money, which I was glad of because I helped him with his tax returns. And you know, you have to report these things. And his friend at the Hermitage, Trish Eccles, would collect the money for him and give it to Ronald McDonald House, which was a nice thing. And then later, after he moved out, and he still continued to busk, and different people would drive him down to Soda City, he started putting out his hat, and he said, "Give some or take some." And there were, you know, people who don't have homes who would come through Soda City. There was one guy who would always stick close to him and look out for him because he was obviously vulnerable, and he would escort him to his car in the parking garage and just make sure he was safe. So that was really neat. Ron had mastered the art of imperfection, as you've already heard. In that picture on the cover of your order of service, he's wearing a white hat. And Chris had sent me that picture, and I cropped it, you know, to fit into the order of service. But if you zoom out on it, you'll see that the hat is frayed on top, deeply frayed on top, and dirty, like sooty. And that was Ron. He didn't pay that much attention to these details. He was more into the fun of the big thing. He had tons of hats in his closet, boots, fly fishing boots, or those wader boots, wellies. He had a hat for every occasion. He had a lederhosen for Oktoberfest, so he could go play his accordion there. He had all kinds of St. Patrick's Day hats and things, and Medj being as social and loving a good time, just like his dad. He's so much like his dad. Would take him to Oktoberfest a lot, and with his accordion when that could be managed. He was imperfect in how he played accordion. He wasn't taught music growing up, though I think he sang in choirs. But my mother was a musician. It would drive her bonkers. He would play the wrong chords. Nobody cared. I'm afraid I'm more like my mother in that regard. I'm like, no, that's the wrong chord. But I never heard it. It was just always so fun to listen to Ron. He'd play in the foyer here at odd times. He would go to the playground after Sunday school where the kids are playing, and he would serenade them just because he loved creating this atmosphere of joy, I think. That was it. And maybe that's about all I'll say for now. Skipping over some of my notes here. I feel that Ron made life delightful for many people on a daily basis. His caregivers often adored him and wanted to have him as a client. A cup of tea and a cookie would fix just about anything, which was a really nice go-to when you had a crappy day. And as you know, with aging, there are a lot of very challenging circumstances. And it was just so nice we could just like, how about a cup of tea? And everything would be okay once again. And I have to say, in preparing for this memorial service, it has changed my attitude from my emotional space, from grief to joy and celebration. And I just started reading again the T. at Cavendish book, and I find it very profound. And my memories give me a lot to think about, to ponder about life and the mystery of the joy and his non-judgmentalness of other people. He was never judgmental, never puritanical. He did things because he loved to. He visited people in the hospital because he wanted to see them. He didn't have this mantle of obligation, of moral, you should. He just wanted to. So I really admired that, and I will miss him. I will share you one limerick, because he had a bunch of them. I have no pain, dear mother, now, but oh, I am so dry. Connect me to a brewery and leave me there to die. That was Ron.
Grandson David is going to share.
My wife wanted me to remind everyone, if you talk to Ron tomorrow, you can make sure to say rabbits. It's the first of the month. And it's a little game you can play with him if you speak to him. For a curious child, there's really no better grandfather than you can have than Ron. We would visit him and Gertrude, and there would just be the buckets of toys that have been previously mentioned. They'd just be there waiting for you. So you would show up at his house, the adults would all catch up, and you'd be playing with all the toys, and then years later, you're in physics class in high school, and you realize, oh, that was educational. Now I see. We got to visit his classroom, and there was the canon mentioned. We were told this story that he had this special way of waking up students who had fallen asleep in class and setting off a desktop cannon to make this huge bang to wake the sleeping students. As a child, we got to visit his classroom, and he set off the cannon for us. I just thought the image in my mind of a being woken to that was just hilarious, and it made me so excited at the prospect of going to college. I really wanted to go. I was like, like this is what it's going to be like. And I will say that, I think the sort of like early physics professors, a lot really do follow that model, because there's that inspiration you get from demonstration and from those things that you're just so surprised by to see in person, whether it's the swinging balls or cannons being set off. It's just, it really is a way to inspire someone. We didn't get to see each other that much because we did live across the country, basically my whole life. Even when he came to Minnesota in his advanced stage, I was in California at that time with my daughter and my wife. And due to that, we really just appreciate the community and the family that he had here, and who are present today. We should appreciate you all being there for him, early on and later in life too. I think we did, and he made sure to make the most of that limited time we did have together, those brief visits that we got to have each year. He really did. It felt like we were really important. He was very impressive, and he had lots of academic achievements, and cultivated a community around him of people who were just drawn to his magnanimous personality. But when we were around, we had his focus and we had his attention. And so there are these memories that I'll have of, him coming to Minnesota to visit us, and he's from the southern climate, and it might be -10 out or something out in the bitter Minnesotan winters, and he would take us ice skating. And I always found it so funny because he would come out with us into the frigid cold wearing this massive puffy black jacket. It looked like he was going out on a polar expedition or something like that, but like that's what his southern what he was accustomed to weather-wise. That's what he needed to be able to brave the cold. And he would do that for us, that he could be a part of us learning to ice skate and learning and going sledding. And he would go in his backyard and just investigate the animals that were, living out in his backyard at the lake behind his house. He would keep all those toys just ready and waiting for us. And, all those things, as we got older, we realized how much more there was to him. These funny stories that he would tell us, whether there was historical importance or academic importance or anything, we would learn as you got older how much more there was to those stories. But I think due to how he treated us and how good he was at being a grandpa to us, that it took a lot longer to kind of figure that out than I maybe would think. He did just such a good job of kind of leaving a lot of that, setting a lot of that aside, and just being a grandfather. And I think my siblings can probably attest to that same thing, that a lot of that stuff didn't really matter when it was just family together. So now, I'm really lucky that I have someone in my life, or had someone in my life, who I can be so proud of. But the little things and those memories that are kind of just ours, that's what I'm going to really, hold on to now. And that's what I'm going to keep close. So, thank you.
We have some brief remarks from friends as well. Is Marguerite here? Marguerite's going to come and share.
He was such a great guy. I met him through folk dancing, and I remember he knew a lot of folk dances, and he knew ones that we had never done before that were really neat, like when there was the crested hen from Denmark, and I don't know, dancing is a form of playing, so it was fun. And then he liked to make, I guess this might be a limerick, but it was fun. I always remember Ron when I see this. The rain, it raineth every day upon the just and unjust fella, but a little more upon the just. The unjust has the just's umbrella. So I met him first in 2007. And then, but folk dancing sort of went by the wayside eventually. And I'm sorry I didn't keep track of Ron. I know that he was playing his accordion outside, but yeah, I lost contact. But I remember him very well, and he's a wonderful guy. So, thank you.
Christian Anderson's going to come, followed by Mark and Patty Drews.
My sincere thanks to the Edge family for allowing me to share a few thoughts about Ron. I don't know when I first met Ron, but I know exactly when I got to know Ron. Sunday, February 19th, 2012. This is the benefit of archiving your email. I was so taken with Ron that I emailed my grad student buddies that evening. Here's what I wrote. I think I've mentioned that I sometimes attend the UU church now. It's a grad student. I was already a professor here. These are friends that I stayed in touch with. It's a place to meet some like-minded people. After the service today, a group was headed to lunch, and I was invited to join in. I ended up next to Ron Edge, a distinguished professor emeritus of physics at USC. He's been a member of the UU since 1958, the same year he joined the USC faculty. I then shared with them the tea at the Cavendish Laboratory story that everyone here knows well, that he had told me over lunch. I also recounted another story he shared with me about challenging Nobel laureate John Cockcroft on a physics question about the shape of the atomic nucleus, except that, unlike with his assessment of the DNA question, this time Ron was right. Here's what struck me at the time, and I wrote them about this. In one case, he was wrong, and in another case, he was right. But in both cases, he was humble. I still remember him laughing about both stories. Later that spring, I attended his talk in the physics department about the history of physics. I loved it. I don't know physics, I'm a historian, but I'm very interested in the history of science. A year later, I had my students writing educational biographies in my course on the history of higher education. I loved chatting with Ron here at the coffee hour at the UU, and I mentioned the focus of my class to Ron and how I thought back to that history his biographies of important physicists. Well, one thing led to another, and a couple weeks later, Ron was in my class giving a mini version of that same lecture. He even brought a bowl that had been made on the same lathe that was used to make the first DNA model at the Cavendish. Here's what's funny about the emails when I looked back on them between us as we set up that exact date for that visit. He was trying to juggle a visit to my class with a visit to the Adventure Children's Museum to do physics experiments with children. And a year after that, we were talking about the new movie about Stephen Hawking, The Theory of Everything, that was coming out. Well, long story short, we ended up there at the Nickelodeon together. I arranged for him to give an introduction to Cambridge in the 50s, and he gave a little mini lecture before everyone watched the screening. So keep this in mind. This is when he's in his 80s. He was in his 80s before I even met him, and he was doing all this well into his 80s. And then, of course, that's not all. I haven't even mentioned him playing the accordion, which we've talked about, his State of the Universe talks, or the many times I sent him a news article about some new scientific or physics discovery, and he'd give me some insight that I couldn't have possibly gleaned on my own. But he was happy to helpfully educate and teach me. So what do we draw from all of these various anecdotes? Ron was first and foremost a learner. A learner. And that's why Ron was such a great teacher. And why he was such a great friend. He was someone I learned a great deal from, not just about physics or the history of science, but about how to approach life. And for that, I am forever grateful.
To the Edge family, thank you very much for the opportunity and the honor to be up here and share. We'll begin with Patty.
I'll bring it down. Hi. Ron Edge, I have trouble talking. In 2002, I was a teacher. I had been a teacher for quite a while in a district that had everything, was very spoiled. And I was called on by a former principal to come to a different district and help them enhance their physical science program. So I thought, okay, that's something different, I'll do that. Well, when I got there and they opened the door to my new classroom, I saw that it had been a storage room. It was so full of stuff, it took me 2-3 weeks to get everything out and to see that it really had been a science room at one time. There were lab tables and so on, but not one single piece of equipment. I was going to teach physics and chemistry, which I had done, but I had done it in a district that gave me whatever I wanted to teach with, and I was at a loss. Well, someone said, all you need to do is get Ron Edge's book called String and Sticky Tape, which Chris mentioned. I had not heard of it, I'll be honest. So I went down to USC, bought the book, and was amazed. It was the most wonderful teaching experience with this book. We're talking, if you're not familiar with it, you can show and help kids and have them do a lab in any of the principles of physics with things like rubber bands, straws, string, of course, tape, paper clips. It was amazing. $20 and I could do, and the kids loved it and they responded to it. It made for an amazing teaching year, well, several years there. Then when we came to the UU, I had no idea that Ron was here, and I saw his name on it, and I was like, oh, I've got to meet him. He's my hero. And I did get to meet him, and he was even more fabulous in person. He really was. Not many times in our life we get to meet one of our heroes, but when you meet them and they're bigger than ever and more than you ever imagined, I'm so thankful that I got to meet him and that I love his book, and I passed it on to so many students and teachers. Thank you.
I remember when Patty came home from that service, just how jacked she was about meeting her hero. Went on and on. Well, about a year later, that hero was outside adventure looking into the great outdoors. And being the director of experiences there, I said, that's Ron. So I went outside and said, Dr. Edge, good to see you. And he goes, you know, I don't know if I've been here before. And I said, well, come on in. Let's go for a tour. And we walked through, and though 85, there's also that 5-year-old kid in him that as he went through the museum, the excitement that he had and the joy I had walking him through. And I told him about an area that we would really love to go ahead and enhance and focus on the physics of flight. Again, his eyes opened up in the excitement that he had. And he goes, what could I do to help make it happen? So I said, well, how about a letter of support? We're sending off our proposal to NASA and hope to go ahead and land a grant to make it happen. And just as you heard earlier, that was important to Ron, to look for the funds. I do remember going up to his house or apartment with Gertrude in the last day before the grant was due and saying, can we sign this? And heading on back and getting it into Washington. So when you travel over the Gervais Street Bridge and you see that nose of the airplane sticking out of that building, know that Ron had a piece of making that happen. And he influenced us in so many ways because after that tour through the museum, I said, knowing what he did and how he influenced Patty, I said, I'd love it if you can come and join us at the museum and work with our 20-something educators. And he goes, how's Thursday? And yeah, thanks to photographs, on March 28th, 2013, he joined us. He was going to spend an hour with us, and after about the third hour, the kids that were in the room with him, just mesmerized with every story, they were saying, as he reached down, they knew there was a pattern. He would reach down into his bin of toys and say one more thing. And they all started saying, every time he'd bend over, they'd all recite one more thing. And he'd bring it out and show them those toys. The next thing, I connected him with a young man from AC Flora who was the director of TEDx Youth. And he had an opportunity to present at TEDx Youth 2014. And when he walked up to the stage and he looked at the crowd of about 800 teenagers, he said, you know, I reckon I'm the oldest one here. And he said, I am. I'm the oldest student here. And what a poignant message that was. He saw himself as an 85-year-old student who knew the power of learning and that it never ends. And something he said during that speech, it was a 10-minute speech that he made into 18-minute one, and he said, you know, you really don't know what the future holds. And I thought how powerful that is to tell a group of high school kids, because it's so true. We have no idea what it holds. But one thing we do know is that his energy, it continues to be with us. It will continue to be with us. And for that, I'm very thankful.
Jonathan?
So I wonder if it's kind of a mystery why I would be here. I am a member of this church, and I have a 12-year-old son. When he was born, we joined this church, moved back here, joined this church, and just started coming, loved being here, wonderful people. And there was a point where Dr. Edge walks in the door, and I was floored because he was my physics professor in 1999, 2000, turn of the century, right? Like, I don't know, like, and I'm like, this is perfect. This guy's amazing. I remember him. He's so awesome. And so if I could just say anything, it is, I love that you point out this concept, that he taught these physics for artists. That was me. So he was my physics professor, but I was an art major in media art. Got kind of a worthless degree from USC, but it's really important I think, to me, to reflect on just how inspirational physics is to artists, and I think he understood that. And certainly as a kid, 20 years old, sitting in a class 2 days a week for 90 minutes, just listening to him talk, and just weave stories and just formulas, and there's stuff, I'm sure there was stuff I was supposed to remember for tests. But I will say that my memory, and it was awesome, it happened here, while we were sitting there, a motorcycle drove by, and I think about Dr. Edge every time a loud vehicle passes, because there's something about the way pitch changes when it's far away and it's slowly and it speeds by you and you can hear that pitch, and it's this idea that is inspiring to artists, right? That inspired me as a kid who wanted to be an artist. That there are sophisticated things happening everywhere, and it's just daily stuff, that dropping a rock in a pond and watching the ripples at certain distances and they hit the other side and come back the other way. And I think of him every time I drop a rock in the pond or an ambulance. I can hear it in the distance and it passes by. But it's funny, the last thing I'll say is this, that I didn't go on to be an artist. I didn't go on to make movies, sci-fi movies. Although, it's Karen texted me and asked if I would talk about him. And we were watching the season finale of Stranger Things at the time. And I'm like, this is like exactly how I know this guy, right? There's physics, and it's probably all wrong, right, from the artist's perspective, but physics inspires artists. But more than that, it was this idea. I actually went on to become a teacher, and I train teachers now. I train public school teachers here in Columbia. And teaching is, it's a stupid metaphor, but teaching is a tree, and we generations of teachers are inspired by the teachers that came before them. And Ron Edge is a part of my tree, for sure. And I don't know if people understand it when I train new teachers, but it's always, he's a part of this thing. And a big part of that is, and I told Mark and Patty, who also were teachers, that we were talking when we walked in, I wrote something, and I decided not to read it because Dr. Edge was one of those teachers that was inspiring in his ability to just come in and talk for 90 minutes. And I'm not gonna talk for 90 minutes, but he could just do it. And there's something to this idea that I'm not writing anything down. I'm just trying to be the best teacher I can be and pass on my passion for my content, and especially to people and to artists needing science, to people who deserved to be included in this knowledge that wouldn't have been there if it weren't for people like that who would say, you know what, we do need to actually teach media arts majors about physics. So I appreciate it. And I'll always, he's my memory. And it's a part of what I do every day in teaching teachers how to teach. So thank you.
And representing the physics department, Yaroslav Bazali.
Hi, everybody. So I am from the physics department, and there is a number of people here who came from the physics department. So Robert and Timir and Carl, and I encourage you to maybe think and say something shortly after me, but I will talk about my own experiences with Ron Edge. When I came to the physics department, Ron was not teaching anymore. So I only saw him maybe 3 or 4 times when he came and gave us a lecture. And these were mostly lectures about his experiences in the Cavendish lab in Cambridge and about science at that time. And what was important for me is that it was sort of a reflection of this period of early physics when it was very romantic and then very heroic. And then now it's not like that. But we still, we heard stories about that, all of us, and some of us saw more people and some saw less people, but we all heard stories about this period of early time, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, of course, how physics was different and how it was super important in the life of the society. So when Ron was speaking, it was a certain different angle on that situation because it was a very British way of experiencing it and talking about it, which was very new for me. And then at some point he came with a talk and he was talking about his work and writing a paper on the science club in Cambridge where a lot of famous people were taking part in the pre-war time. So then I got a copy of this paper and I was so inspired that I decided to translate it and publish back in my old country. And that also was a very interesting story because although Ron did not participate too much, but it was I found myself in the middle between my 2 older physics colleagues. One was Ron and the other was the person who agreed to publish my translation in the Popular Physics Journal back home. And this guy told me that, it's all fine, but you have to write very, very detailed footnotes about all things that are mentioned in this paper. So I worked on it very hard and I learned a lot of things about the science in the United Kingdom and about the Industrial Revolution because there are references to the old times in the paper. So I got so much more educated and it all worked out in the end very nicely. So these 2 colleagues of mine, they never met. They were both really nice physicists. They're both not longer with us. And I think it is amazing that there are these connections between people through many steps, but they're still real and consequential. So I guess the last thing I want to say is that absolutely without any connections with the current event, I was in the office of my colleague at the department, and that was a complete accident because I haven't seen him for a while. And when he invited me, I saw Ron's old edition of this book that everybody mentioned. And it's still, it's a photocopy book with a soft cover and the spiral binding. And that was the first time I learned about this book. I now know much more about it from everybody's talking about it, but I got it in my hand. I asked, can I have it? So I have it now in my office, and I think what we have to think about is somehow maybe resurrecting it in one way or another. And thank you very much. And my colleagues, maybe if you have anything to add, that would be very nice.
Thank you. And of course, we have a great time of gathering in the social hall. We'll give opportunities for so many other stories to be shared. And we look forward to that time together. Rod is going to lead us in a song. If you would like to join, it's 311 in your hymnal. You can stand with me if you're able.
I've got the music. Just need to scooch that over a tad. All right. So Rick Maston was a
Unitarian minister. I met him once in seminary, but Karen, actually, I think you saw him play maybe at some point. Play here. Okay. And this was one of his favorite songs the Unitarians have. I've used this at memorial services a couple of times because it just speaks, it has that spirit about it. So this is Let It Be a Dance. And I'm out of tune a little bit. Can you give me a second here? And there we go. I'm going to be this way. I'm kind of like Gertrude. That's a little better, isn't it? All right. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Let the dancing song be heard. Play the music, say the word, and fill the sky with sailing birds. Let it be a dance, let it be a dance, let it be a dance. Learn to follow, learn to lead. Feel the rhythm, feel the need. To reap the harvest, plant the seed. Let it be a dance. Let's keep going, folks.
Everybody turn and spin. Let your body learn to bend.
There's good times.
Let it be a dance. Everybody turn and spin.
Time for joy, a time to cry. Take it as it passes by. Let it be a dance.
Let it be the dance we do.
May I have this
Dance with you.
through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance.
Morning star comes out at night. Without the darkness, no light.
If nothing wrong, then nothing's right. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance. Let it be a dance.
Let the sunshine and the rain
Share the laughter and the pain. And round we go again. Let it be a dance.
Chris is going to come and lead us in a prayer. You may be seated.
Before I end with this little prayer, I have to share something that my daughter had demanded that I share because she could not come because she's been sick, so they could not come. But she was planning to be up here sick and all because she wanted to quote my dad's favorite quote every single time any of us got sick, especially if we had a cough, which was, well, don't forget, it's not the cough that carries you off, it's the coffin they carry you off in. During the reception, after about 20, 30 minutes, we're going to play a little mini movie documentary about his life. And it's got a lot of fabulous photos of him and Gertrude and old and new clips. And I think you'll really enjoy it. So we'll do it in about 20 or 30 minutes. Oh God, we are very grateful for the gift of Ron to all of us here. He lived a life of science, teaching, and humor. Ron knew that science and education can have a life-changing impact on others and can lift people up to a bigger life of excitement and discovery. He knew that humor can bring joy to others and that joy is greatly needed in our world. God, please bless this legacy of joy and discovery that Ron left behind and allow him to continue seeking and sharing knowledge and joy in your presence. Amen.
I share a reading called The Exegesis by Elder Olson. Nothing is lost. Be still. The universe is honest. Time, like the sea, gives all back in the end, but only in its own way, on its own conditions. Empires as grains of sand, force as coal, mountains as pebbles. Be still, I say. You were never the water, only a wave, not substance, but a form substance assumed. The way we end our service at the UU is to extinguish our chalice. And oftentimes we say that even though we are extinguishing this flame, it continues as we leave this place in our hearts. Aaron Freeman writes that you should ask a physicist to speak at your funeral. Because if the physicist speaks at your funeral, they will tell you that no energy gets created in the universe and none is destroyed. So every particle, every vibration, all your energy, every BTU of heat, every wave of particle is you present, staying connected in this world. So Ron, even though we grieve your passing, even though we say goodbye to you today, we know that the energy of who you are continues to warm our hearts and stimulate our minds. As we play our postlude today, I will extinguish our chalice and I will ask the family to make their way to the social hall. And as soon as the family has been able to get to the social hall, we invite everyone to be dismissed. Thank you all for being a part of the service today.
you.